Turning back to the news that the ACLU's legal alert broke on our air at the top of the hour, the Supreme Court ruling keeping the Trump-era Title 42 border policy in place for now. The ruling was a 5-4 decision with Justice Neil Gorsuch joining Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson in dissent. The court agreed to hold oral arguments on the matter, and in the meantime, Title 42 will remain in place. Now, the White House was hoping to see Title 42 lifted today, with thousands of migrants waiting at the southern border. At least they were saying they were prepared for the possibility that that could happen. NBC's Josh Letterman is at the White House. So, Josh, I know you've been reaching out to your sources. I've been reaching out to my sources. They were bracing for the possibility of a decision today, didn't know which way this was going to go. On the one hand, the CDC under the Biden administration has said, look, it's time to lift Title 42. There's no longer a health crisis in place. On the other hand, the administration knows that this would politically be very challenging.
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. This has been an awkward issue for the Biden administration because, as you pointed out, on the one hand, they want to do whatever they can to try to stem this flow of migrants that has become a huge political problem. It's been a humanitarian crisis, as we've been discussing. On the other hand, on its face, I think everyone kind of acknowledges that using a COVID policy instead of an immigration policy doesn't really make sense with where we are at this stage in the pandemic. Now, this decision from the Supreme Court to take this up really just kind of kicks this can down the road for the White House, because it means that this Title 42 will stay in place for now, which means they're not going to have to worry necessarily about this surge in the coming days, which is something the White House was very concerned about, particularly when they asked the Supreme Court. They said, look, even if you're going to lift this, at least give us 48 hours before that were to take place to start to put those transition plans into action, to surge resources to the border area. So that will happen. They will have not just 2 days. They will have at least until next year, with the Supreme Court saying that they will hold arguments in February and then decide many months after that. But ultimately, this is going to come back down to the same issue. This just really kind of pushes this into the future. And, for the White House, this is going to continue to be a difficult problem that they are facing as they head into this new year.
Yeah, this is really, Josh, one of the most politically challenging and frankly challenging from a policy perspective issues, not just for this White House, but you go back decades, quite frankly. This is something that Washington has wrestled with for more than a decade, how to deal with the issue of immigration, migrants, and also asylum. We are at a moment where Republicans are preparing to take over the House. And as I said at the top of this show, as you and I first started this conversation, really this comes down to ultimately a broader immigration policy. Do you have a sense that this will in any way energize or light a fire under those discussions in the new year with the new Congress to try to get something done on a broader, more fundamental level?
Well, that is certainly the million-dollar question. We had seen some interest in that toward the end of this year with discussions in the last weeks and months between Senators Tillis and Senator Sinema of Arizona on a potential compromise. That didn't really seem to go anywhere. It's certainly possible that this is going to kind of galvanize those conversations and make lawmakers say, look, we've got to deal with this through some legislative route. But the fact of the matter is they've been trying to do that for decades. They haven't been able to get any kind of common ground that would actually be able to address this. And I think if you even just look at what the Supreme Court is looking at here, they're not looking at an issue of immigration. They're not even looking at an issue of COVID-19 policy. They are looking at the very narrow issue about whether these Republican-led states have the right to be able to try to intervene and challenge the government's order. And I think that really speaks to just how convoluted this policy has gotten. Everyone understands our immigration policy doesn't work anymore, and they're trying to come up with these slapdash responses to try to hold the system together. If there is good news out of what took place today, it's that at least the status quo may stay in place for the next several months. For those who are worried about that border surge, that could potentially reduce some of those concerns. But, over the long haul, this is not a fix any more than putting Title 42 in place in the first place was a fix.